Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, where to avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a podcast, only a podcast. I am Marc Dottavio.
It's only a podcast. I'm Seth.
And today we welcome back film critic Keith Phipps to discuss a harrowing 1960 art house classic and its unlikely grindhouse remake. Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring is a stark, unsettling adaptation of a 13th century folk ballad following two devout parents taking revenge on their child's murderers. 12 years later, it ended up as the inspiration for the grisly debut film of horror director Wes Craven, 1972's The Last House on the Left. We will talk about how Bergman's religious fable morphed into the template for the modern rape revenge film and what was lost or possibly gained in translation. And here to help us is Keith Phipps. His long, illustrious career as a critic has included being writer and editor for the AV Club, The Dissolve, and Uprocks. His work has appeared in GQ, Vulture, Rolling Stone, The New York Times, and most recently on his own Substack with Scott Tobias, The Reveal, as well as the Next Picture Show podcast. He's also the author of Age of Cage, 4 Decades of Hollywood Through One Singular Career. Did I get everything in there?
You got it. That's it. That's
all right. Cool.
My whole life right there in less than a minute.
That's all you. That's it. Yeah.
That's so existential. Well, Keith, the last time that we had you on was for, to date, our only reverse episode where we talked about watchable films by provocative directors. And those were The Straight Story by David Lynch and Rob Zombie's The Munsters. I figured it was time to finally punch your Unwatchables card.
Yeah, I miss those days, though. Bad. I miss the watchable days. Now we're back to unwatchable.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit behind the curtain here. I was supposed to be on months ago, and I've had to cancel twice for various unpreventable reasons. And but with like when we're figuring out what episodes, what we're gonna do. Like I've written, I'm a horror fan. I've written about horror movies pretty, everyone, fairly often. And so that you kind of end up watching Last House on the Left, just as research or background or whatever. And like every time, like, I'm never going to watch this movie again. And then when we were hashing this out, I was like, I guess I'm going to watch this movie again.
That happens with so many movies that we cover on this too, especially if there's ones I've kind of recently watched. And I know I need a little refresher on them, which I did do with these two. But it was not a fun day catching up on them.
No, nobody wants to sit around and eat pizza to this stuff. No.
I mean, they're both tough sits. I mean, I like both these movies. I should make that clear. I find them very worth discussing. I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, in terms of, I mean, this kind of goes to the name of your podcast. They're difficult to watch.
Yeah,
unwatchable.
For sure. You're going to earn your stripes today with these.
Good boy. We're proud of you.
The Last House on the Left, I thought, was kind of the main attraction, at least when we were first putting the list together. But I mean, watching The Virgin Spring was like equally as upsetting to me. Oh, yeah. I mean, it really is a tough one. But was there a particular reason that you went towards these two on the list? I mean, I know you had a couple different ones you were considering, but is there a Bergman Craven kind of a specialty for you? I
mean, I've always been fascinated by the fact that Craven made his debut with a remake of an Ingmar Bergman film, or remake adaptation, let's say, I guess.
Yes,
and like when I first discovered that, I was like, that's crazy. Wes Craven, Ingmar Bergman, those two worlds should never meet. But like, as the more Bergman you see, especially, but also the more Craven you see, but the more Bergman you see, it's like, oh yeah, these two filmmakers actually have a lot more in common than you might suspect. And a Virgin Spring tips over into grimy horror movie so easily. And I've never talked about them together, so I thought that would be a fun discussion, or at least a interesting discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I was almost struck with I didn't know what to think about the pairing other than just pure high art, low art. But I was surprised at some of the intersections of just style of, I mean, you couldn't call like Virgin Spring or anything that Ingmar's done feeling like lo-fi or anything, but there is a staginess, almost like they're Shakespearean actors or something, which is sort of something that bleeds into Last House on the Left, for me at least, is this sort of unreality that they both kind of deal in. Like Last House on the Left is more in the like, these are full on cartoon characters, like almost. But yeah, they both deal in this, like, I don't know, it's like a fable, the world of fables or cartoons or something, even though they're dealing with really heavy stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so just to kind of focus in on The Virgin Spring, for anyone who doesn't know, it's from 1960 and by the Swedish filmmaker, Ingmar Bergman. And it takes place in medieval Sweden. It's actually adapting a 13th century like folk ballad. And I read the entire ballad, one of the versions of it, because it's very short. And it's pretty much what we see in these movies with one big exception. It's like in the actual folk tale, there's these highwaymen who run into actually 3 daughters instead of 1 from the same couple and kill all 3 of them. The 3 highwaymen do end up back at the parents' house where 2 of them are killed. But the big revelation is that they are actually the long-lost sons of the parents also, which I'm kind of glad was not retained. I don't think we needed that extra layer of irony in either of these movies.
No, but, yeah, I can see that too. It's a good edit in making the adaptation, I think.
Right, but it just goes to show that.
Yeah, that's what you wind up finding with a lot of, like, if you actually read real fairy tales or like old works of, like, I don't know, verse and things. It always is there's just like a few extra elements that you don't remember. There's always more going on, which is like funny. It kind of makes it go on a left turn rather than the focus of what we remember about this being about the protection of virginity and the revenge when it is taken.
And it really leaves it wide open for Bergman to take it in whatever direction he wants to. And I think he takes it into a very Bergman coded direction. And I mean, I would like to get your guys' kind of general thoughts on Bergman going into this, because he's a director I tend to get into a lot of kind of friendly arguments with, other cinema people about, because I'm a little cooler on him than most.
Or some not so friendly ones too. Yeah.
Yeah, or not so friendly if it's Seth. I tend to really like his movies that are not the ones that his fans tend to cherish him for, like ones that are a lighter, like Smiles of a Summer Night, or super experimental, like Persona. I sometimes get stuck with him when the movies are a little more kind of dour and airless. And Seth brought up a theatrical quality, which there is sometimes, like the stagings and even these monologues can, in some of his films, get a little kind of didactic for me. It's mainly like, sometimes I see him treating the characters more like symbols than like individuals. And maybe I'm just talking about Cries and Whispers. That's my main movie where I kind of can't stand.
I was going to say, if you haven't
loves.
done Cries and Whispers on Unwatchables, that's definitely an Unwatchables candidate. Sure. You're not alone. I feel like Bergman's reputation has dimmed somewhat. This century, I'm not sure it's quite the revered. He's definitely a revered figure. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's quite the unassailable master that I think he was once considered. I'm a fan. I mean, I do. There's just so many movies I do really like, and I think as to what you were saying, there are a lot of there's sort of like you have this idea of what an Ingmar Bergman film is, but there are he worked in a lot more styles and genres than you might expect, and I think it's one of those filmographies that really rewards you the deeper you get into it. And I think the more you watch, you realize like what a left turn Persona is. Like, he never made another movie.
Mm-hmm.
He never made a movie like that before or after. And it's so striking and another very upsetting film in many ways. But there's a lot I haven't seen. I still haven't seen Smiles of a Summer Night. I will get to it soon. I had that Criterion box set that I've kind of been working through a little bit at a time, but also a little bit at a time because, a lot of Bergman at once is a lot of Bergman at once.
Well, Smiles of a Summer Night's a good one to throw into watching a long line of them, because it's such a breath of fresh air and lightness,
because he can be so dour, and that's like the traditional thing is his stereotype is that is very serious. We're going to talk about how dead God is right now, which that was my introduction to him, was Seventh Seal and the Religion trilogy, because I was brought up evangelical household. So when I found these at 16, they were very helpful and I'm sure they've been for many people in those situations, right? But I do understand why maybe his star has fallen a little bit, or at least just like the older I get, the more I'm like, okay, you know, like intellectual atheism isn't as like exciting to me anymore, or as like novel now, especially in the context if you're looking at film since Bergman, like that has been really, really, really hammered home and everything. And I did notice this time around that was one of my it winds up being one of my issues with this film is like I feel like he's one of those filmmakers that kind of like he's really hitting that, and this is maybe like the one too many for me sometimes, like this movie once I go through his filmography and stuff.
Well, and that's kind of the disconnect, I guess, that I have with some of his work, although not so much with this one, surprisingly. But he does have this kind of tortured agnosticism that is going through so many of his movies, and just the way that it manifests itself. Like for me, I don't know. I was trying to think about like why I feel distant from his approach to guilt and agnosticism, whereas Scorsese or Abel Ferrara have very distinctly Catholic kind of perspectives and motifs, and I guess that those tend to manifest more in these like flawed characters who have tortured consciences about giving into their animal nature, and not so much this kind of explicit dichotomy that he struggles with between is there a God, and if not, that must mean eternal emptiness, which is just something I don't really relate to.
I think it's a very mid 20th century way of looking at things too. I mean, I think kind of looking at it as an example of you can see why these questions, these sort of either or, and if not, if God is silent, what meaning does life have? I'm not sure it's something that's as I don't think we wrestle with those questions in the same terms now as in those years after World War II. When the atom bomb and the reality of the Holocaust and all these things were kind of like really changed the idea of what God was, and for a lot of people. So we have some distance from that, but I don't know. I still find these films really quite rich. In terms of like gear shifts, by the way, I just recently for a piece I was writing, I had occasion to watch the movie that came out either right before or right after this, The Devil's Eye, which is really not a film that people go to a lot, but he had the condition of making Virgin Springs, he had to agree to make a comedy, and so he had The Devil's Eye, and it's a silly movie in many ways because it's about Casanova being sent by the devil back to Earth to seduce a virgin, but it also ends up wrestling with a lot of really Bergman questions, like what place is God in the 20th century? It also like he can't help but making the sort of film he would make anyway, no matter what genre he's working in.
And what really made me skeptical going into watching this movie for the first time, and I've seen it a few times now, is that it's based on this very old fable, and I was scared about the potential this had to feel really schematic in that religious way that Bergman sometimes tends to lean. And I think that why I like this movie, like to the extent that it kind of gets past that, so that it feels like a specific, like nuanced personal tragedy that's happening. And there's all kinds of details in here that I think focus on just the visceral wallop of what's happening, and themes that are more elemental that somebody who's not religious or not struggling with those things could, look into. And I don't know, I think that's why this movie works for me. Is it really is like a harrowing watch, and I'm just very much in it moment to moment, and until the end, like up to the point where we get to like the last scene that I kind of want to spend some time talking about. It really does feel to me like there's some ambiguity about what it's saying about mercy and vengeance, and maybe the limits of our own, beliefs and how it affects our behavior. But yeah, I was always surprised that how powerful I find this, even though there's like part of me that resists things that I resist in his other films. But I guess if we want to maybe take that as a jumping off point here, as I want to talk about the characters, right? So we
should actually lay it out.
Yeah, we have Max von Sydow, who's in a lot of Bergman's films, who I don't know. I was kind of surprised too that he's not really this hard-edged religious guy when we start out. I think they are that, anybody in the 13th century would have been at that time. But
right,
he
goes without saying.
Yeah,
right.
That's one thing I really like about the movie. I studied medieval literature for a while in grad school, and you kind of have this idea of everyone walking around being in this state of awe of God all the time. But it's actually, when you read literature and you really kind of get into the art, these are everyday people. Part of the appeal, I think, of reading medieval literature is you realize people don't really change throughout the centuries. They want the same things they've always wanted. These are to me, it's like a really good depiction of how someone might practice, a 13th century person of certainly basically a middle class person would treat religion on a day-to-day basis. It's just part of their life, not like something that they are in awe of at all times.
Yeah, and even though they are definitely religious, like there's this moment near the beginning where he tries to stop his wife from pouring like hot wax onto herself as kind of an offering to God. And the way that he kind of dotes on and spoils this daughter who is Karen, who another way of looking at her is that she is this symbol of unsullied innocence. But
she's
I really
the
feel
Disney princess,
right? But the movie, I feel like, makes her feel like a real teenager. Like she's kind of rebellious, a little goofy. She's definitely too trusting and pampered in a way that puts her in harm's way. And this last time actually made me feel like this is kind of like a flower child. This is kind of like a hippie character to carry it over to Last House on the Left.
Yeah. And I think the best way that happens is the contrast between her and the pagan girl, which is like that whole thread being there is a big deal for me. There's this like girl who studies like paganism and does weird rituals and stuff, and everybody hates her. And she's like, has dark hair and like a strange way about her, and definitely
she's pregnant.
Yeah, she's the contrast of the Disney princess we're talking about, the titular virgin. Which, yeah, that's one of the threads in here that really I find, I don't know, that like brings it to another level in which there is like this, I don't know, whatever lens you're seeing it through is this confusion with the spiritual. It doesn't have to be a specific deity or religion necessarily.
Yeah, I kind of wonder what you guys make of that character. Ingari is her name, and she's definitely kind of a foil to Karen, where she is more worldly and maybe better fit to survive in it. But it always surprised me how much time we spend with her. Like the movie opens with her, and she's scared to go into the forest, and ends up, like, presumably surviving because of that. But I mean, do you think that it's just a simple dichotomy between like the two of them?
I don't think it's really that simple. And I do think, one thing to touch on is her encounter with the one-eyed man,
right.
Who all sort of like coded as Odin. And I think it's dealing with the persistence of pagan beliefs in a Christian country. And like, as with a lot of this movie, I think I think there's a lot of ambiguity baked into that as well. I mean, definitely she is treated as the less moral character, the more questionable character. But I think also, we're allowed to see her point of view. I mean, I think we're allowed to see why, watching Karen and the privileged and spoiled existence that she lives versus the one that she experiences because she is a servant to them. I think you're allowed to see where resentment might come from. And if Christianity is the religion of the haves in many ways, for the medieval Sweden we see here, paganism, you can see where a religion for the have-nots would have its appeal as well.
Yeah, I totally agree about that. that the character is, I think we're invited to relate to her and, see that she gets admonished for, going to the dance the night before, and the other girl gets to go and then just wants to sleep through church the next morning and is still, pampered and treated so much better by everybody.
Yeah, there's
And
an uncanniness and there's something unreal about the Virgin, right? Like that's like a big part of it that is contrasted there. Not like that we like hate her and are total. It's not like some kind of indie movie where the not pretty girl who gets pushed around, it's all about her or something. But yeah, I don't know. That is part of it.
And there's definitely an ambiguity to all this foreshadowing that's happening, from that encounter that kind of mystical encounter that you mentioned, Keith, where she's talking to this guy who seems to be kind of prophesizing what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And she herself is convinced that she wished for it to happen and was responsible for it. And all of that's left a little bit, mysterious and open-ended in a good way for me. But then we get to this, centerpiece sequence where she comes across these men and is attacked. And man, I mean, that is such a long, queasy, really powerful
so
sequence.
Much worse than I remember it. That I think I might have seen, because when it first played in America, it was censored, and I first saw this on VHS back in the 90s, and then when I've seen it since then, it's more graphic than I remember it being on that first viewing, and that might very well be because the censored version was what was on VHS at the time. Because when I revisited Persona, that long graphic sexual description in Persona is so different than in the version I saw first time, which was a very toned down. The subtitles were very toned down for sensitive American audiences. So
Wow.
I'm glad that there's the cat. I'm glad that the
first one.
I'm glad that we have the uncensored versions available to us. But it is kind of interesting to think about the versions that were floating around for so long here. It was quite a controversial movie in its time.
Yeah, between this and Persona, you don't usually think of Bergman as like a boundary-pushing, filmmaker in terms of sexuality. But both of those movies, it's kind of shocking to imagine that. And I mean, I would think by 1960 standards, there probably hasn't been a scene of sexual assault that was that just straightforward and matter of fact.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was inspired by Rashomon in some ways. I think Bergman said as much,
right.
but this is more graphic and extended than what we see in Rashomon.
Yeah, there's no music, there's no style going on. It definitely setting, probably that and Rashomon are setting the template for how these sorts of scenes can be approached in maybe like, I don't know, the most responsible kind of way, like even down to Irreversible, which is all about just depicting it flatly as it is with no like heightened excitement or anything, no music cues.
Yeah, and also I want to talk about Sven Nykvist, who's that's probably how you say his name, something like that, who did the cinematography for this and a bunch of Bergman's movies, and some Woody Allen movies, a Tarkovsky film. I think he did Crimes and Misdemeanors. And there are so many like just stark images in this movie that stay with me. And every time that we get to that shot where the little boy is just kind of dropping some impotent handfuls of dirt onto her body while there's snow or pollen or whatever is coming down from the sky, just like takes my breath away.
Yeah, he's stunning. He's just one of the best to ever do it. And
incredible.
I think, is this their first collaboration, or was there looking at it now, this seems to be their first collaboration. And I'm not sure that Bergman, I'm not sure if he worked with another cinematographer after that, but it certainly is their best, is his best known collaboration. You'd almost think it would arrive a little later in his career because there's some very major Bergman films before them, but I always associate those two as a team in many ways.
Yeah, and there's the way that they use foregrounds in so many of these shots, whether it's that mystical guy's cabin with the water streaming everywhere, or tree branches looming, or in the end when Max von Sydow is strangling to death one of the the murderers, and it's framed like literally with both of them engulfed in flames.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe Bergman doesn't even always get enough credit as a visual stylist, since he's kind of considered to be so dry, most of the time.
Yeah, I think with a lot, as with much of Bergman, the
mhm.
the common conception is a misconception.
Yeah. And so we get these guys arriving back to the the family's house, which in this version is so much easier to take as a plausible development because of the setting. Like this is the one, farmstead in the area that
Right,
people
for
would end up
miles.
to.
So yeah.
It's not like some coincidence where they're just suddenly showing up. So in a way, this feels almost more realistic to me than Last House on the Left.
Yes.
And, at that moment where they find out what's going on, and I should point out, too, this character we have of the little boy who is with them, who I think after Karen has been killed, he's like, I guess, this new, symbol of innocence in a way that's, starting from a much more difficult place and is in a much weirder position, like much thornier place right now. And I keep finding myself kind of drawn into his story as the rest of the movie unfolds. And when they find out what's happening and the parents just kind of go into this kind of chilling, just automatic, unspoken, getting ready to go about their business. And I've always loved how he doesn't quite depict any kind of hand wringing going into it. It's like as soon as they find out, they start going through almost a ritual of, him felling that tree with his bare hands.
Totally mechanical.
And flagellating himself before. And it's like all of a sudden, it's almost like they're going back to the old ways where he had been softer before.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of like add on to what I was saying before, yes, you do get this sort of like a more casual depiction of religion and religious practice, but I think you also kind of get the sense we're supposed to think this character maybe he's been slipping a little, like, letting things slide a little bit in terms of his faith as well. But to talk about the boy who is just called boy, I think it's another occasion, another instance of Bergman throwing in, refusing to let you read this movie simply. Because even if you can, in some ways, if you could take any pleasure in the revenge that's exacted on these murderers, rapists and murderers, the boy's not one of them, but he suffers just the same fate.
Yeah, man, that moment when he basically decides that he's going to kill the boy too,
gotta do it.
Just hurls him against that wall. That honestly might be one of the most upsetting thing of all the upsetting things that happen in this movie because of who is doing it and the kindness that he's shown to the boy up to that point.
It's a return. Yeah, it is the virgin is gone and now we are back to the, I don't know, you could say what the stereotype, at least in their minds, is of paganism. This sort of more anarchic, more primordial animal kind of way of being seems to be there. Almost like the fact that he does kill a child is like back to this, like, again, like a primordial, like sacrificial kind of place almost. It's just like they've lost this more quote unquote civilized religion or something because their god has deserted them, right?
Especially after we have that kind of haunting monologue that one of the farmhands says to the little boy, which is something along the lines of, God perhaps is more merciful than you think, or he tells him this kind of story of being rescued from the edge of the abyss. And it seems like he's being set up to be a subject of God's mercy when, quite the opposite happens.
Well, God might have wanted to preserve him, but mom and dad do not.
Yeah, or at least dad doesn't.
Yes.
But and now I definitely want to talk about where the movie goes after that, because, the whole family ends up going to find her body. And this is where, we have the kind of moral point of, what a fable would be, where he vows that he's going to build this church. And then a literal miracle happens. At least that's how it plays to me. Where, spoiler alert for anybody who's going to watch The Virgin Spring and hasn't yet. But once they, lift up her body and the magical stream starts coming, I don't know. That diminishes for me some of what makes what came before so much more complicated. And
because now
I
God
would like
just
to get everybody
exists or
else's takes on
something.
it.
Yeah,
It
and
seems like having an affirmation is not where this movie should be ending, and it does kind of undermine to me, what had been so ambiguous before.
I think there's more ambiguity built into than you might think, because yes, you get a sign from God, but let's consider the context of it. He promises to build a church there, right? But what kind of God uses this as a source of a miracle? I mean, on the one hand, you can look at it as like, here's an expression of faith, right? And like,
yes.
even in this darkness, God will always be there to forgive you. But on the other hand, and I think you can look at, I think the film invites both readings. It's kind of like, if this is God, that's kind of horrific in a way. If this is how God presents himself into the world, like what kind of God are we dealing with here? Like, have you ever seen the movie The Rapture, the Michael Tolkien film?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it reminds me of that in a way, because it's like, in the end, like, treating the, for those who haven't seen it, it kind of treats the evangelical interpretation of the end of the world literally, and depicts it literally, and like, in the end, well, spoiler, I guess, but in the end, I'll be as vague as possible. Like, there's a sort of a rejection of, even if this is true, I need to reject it because it's not right. Like, I have and like, it also kind of reminds me of the end of Breaking the Waves, when we kind of get the bell ringing, which is kind of like a big, like, God affirming that this sacrifice was worth it. It's like, well, what kind of God asked for this kind of sacrifice in the first place? So I think both those readings are kind of I think a film invites both those interpretations, and probably some I'm not even thinking of, but I'm not sure it's quite a simple ending.
Right. I mean, I read it as that. Yeah, I basically do see it as pretty tragic. I don't know. I oscillate because, it does feel like it's really hammering home. It's trying to make it so that, my grandpa would be like, see, that's Jesus right there. Because it is just like he's shouting to the heavens and the heavens answer or whatever. But I definitely see what you're saying as far as it being like, this is a God announcing himself as, like, to me, like, unhelpful God. Even beyond that, it is seeing someone kind of reaching, like, we are pushed by the way the narrative flows and everything to see this as a miracle, but really it is just a trickling of water, right? Which it's not the most miraculous thing. It is someone. It makes it even sadder to me, that reading, is seeing this father who's going to take anything he can and make it like and use it in a way that will preserve him and give him some sort of, like, way of getting back to stasis after his world has been destroyed, right? Which is just like, I don't know, I'm going to use this trickle of water here to make me feel like there's something that made this worth it, right?
At least it's something. And
rather than just darkness. Yeah.
I looked up a few old reviews. Can I read an excerpt from one of them real quickly?
Oh, please do.
This is a negative review. It's one of those negative reviews that I think actually gets the movie. It's like, you got the movie, you just don't like what you've been shown. It's Ben Kubaski from Newsday from 1960. It says, the impression that almost all the Virgin Spring gives is one of almost utter futility and helplessness. There's much talk through the movie about God's mercy from which hope springs, but the talk comes from characters so relievedly dreary that it's, I think it means unrelievedly, dreary, that it's hard to think they really believe in what they're talking about. And the film's action is so overwhelmingly depressing that all the lip service paid to hope seems a mockery. And like, I think this guy didn't like the movie, but I think this is a pretty good description of what the movie's doing in many ways.
Yeah, and while I wouldn't go as far negative as that person was being, I do kind of see that, and I did specifically think about Breaking the Waves ending too during this, because when I was thinking about how I didn't like it here, I had to challenge myself, like, okay, how come that doesn't bother me in Breaking the Waves? Because pretty much the same thing happens. except that obviously the journey there in Breaking the Waves, if I remember correctly, the main character never really wavers in her faith, no matter all of these psychotic places that it takes her to.
Well, this guy does, yeah.
And and it's kind of a less typical, rendering of her journey getting there. So maybe her actually being affirmed in the end seems so just phantasmagorical that it somehow like goes so far over the edge that it works for me. But then again, I can't necessarily intellectually defend that. And it might just be also because these are things I'm always on guard for with Bergman. And, so maybe that's baggage that I'm bringing to it also.
Sure. I had some baggage with the ending, definitely, of just like, I'm watching another Bergman and Max von Sydow is throwing up his arms and saying, "Where are you, God?" And and that is like maybe a failing on my part as a viewer from just seeing like a bunch of his movies a lot. I don't know, over the course of time or something, but it is there. That is like part of my feelings being lukewarm about the movie come from that, I guess, is like some of those moments and just that like, oh, okay, we're doing the Bergman thing. But I know that's not really the way to approach the movie and really a fair way to go about it. It's personal.
Yeah, and I think in the end, and I'll make this my final thoughts on it, as a Bergman skeptic, and especially for this particular mode of Bergman, this is still one of the ones that I really like by him. And having watched it like 3 or 4 times now, it actually just holds up as just scene by scene as an in the moment experience. And I do think that it's very powerful and that it just works as an actual human story with some of those caveats aside. And as far as the dour Bergman, if you even want to necessarily put that in the same category, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the same thing as like Cries and Whispers or something. This is one of the few that I do ultimately really like, and I'm always kind of surprised that I do, just for the sheer power of the filmmaking that I don't think always gets appreciated by him. Was there anything else that you wanted to add in, Seth, before we let Keith have the final word?
Not really. Not anything more than I've already said. I feel like, it's like lesser in my esteem as far as his movies are concerned. I would go to others for his railing against the silence of God, I guess. And it is just like, it's gloomy. It is just like gloomy in a way that Seventh Seal or other dark ones aren't for me. I don't know, just whatever palette thing is going on for me.
I mean, you mentioned the God Silence trilogy, and this is immediately before it. There's this film, and then there's The Devil's Eye, which I mentioned before, and then Through a Glass Darkly is 1961. So I think it's really interesting to see this film right before that, particularly if there is such we get a moment of God breaking silence in a way, or do we? I guess that's is a question. It's almost like a last chance to deal with a depiction of God as a presence in the world, that and The Devil's Eye for that matter, before moving into the God Silence trilogy.
Yeah.
If you're looking for last words, I like this one a lot. I mean, it is a tough sit though. You are absolutely correct about that.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny when I was doing research, just looking at these 2 movies and going to Last House on the Left being this kind of radically different approach to similar material. It was only 12 years later that it came out. There's not like a huge gap between them.
That's insane.
It is, but I mean,
right?
The sort of change in standards as to what was acceptable and what we were accepting in theaters, theatrically released movies, between 60 and 72. There's a lot of revolutions there as well. I remember my mother didn't go to the movies that often before I was before I took her. I made her take the movies a lot when I was a kid, but I remember she talked about how she had not seen that many movies in a while, and she went to see MASH and was just appalled that you were even allowed to depict these things in a movie. And it's like, if you check out our movies for a couple of years, you could just what gets into movies can shift quite a bit.
Yeah, and this is a wild example of that. And it probably helped too that he was kind of releasing this, as far as I understand, through like the drive-in circuit. This was an exploitation film where things were not expected to have that high class feeling to them.
It's not a Swedish art film. No, it's not
exactly. And it was Wes Craven's very first film, and we talked about The Hills Have Eyes remake on here, but we also talked a little bit about the original in preparation for that. And I feel like in both of those movies, you really get the feel of like a first-time filmmaker figuring things out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess the first thing that always comes to mind when it comes to The Last House on the Left, is there any measure by which this is actually a well-made film?
I mean, I think it works in part because it's not. I mean, The Hills Have Eyes,
Mm-hmm.
I remember, I haven't seen that one in a while, but I remember that being sort of a quantum leap forward in terms of his work as a stylist, as someone who could actually move the camera and set up shots and et cetera, et cetera. Whereas I think the griminess and the almost near documentary feel of this is part of why it works. I think its shortcomings are part of its virtue, part of what makes it an interesting film in many ways. Like, I had forgotten until rewatching it. An example is I had forgotten to rewatching it that the dinner scene is so obviously filmed on a set. Like I'm guessing they just like lost the location and couldn't film it there. But I think
it's just like black walls behind them.
But it gives it like this, like how Beetlejuice basically switches to a set halfway through after they quote unquote redecorate the house, right? But I almost feel it gives it like an extra layer of unreality in a way that actually thought enhanced it. It's just one of those things where all the seams that the seams are part of the art, I guess is the way I put it.
Yeah, you couldn't find a better foil. This is definitely the pagan girl, and Ingmar Bergman is the Disney princess by comparison. Because we have like, I totally agree that what works for this one is like that thread you get in these sort of half-assed, like kind of fucked up low budget movies, is that you don't know where the good idea and the bad idea start or end. Like, and really it's like how they all mix together, because it is like such an inconsistent movie in that it's like one moment it's like two cops bumbling and it's a comedy. It feels like it's going to be Dukes of Hazzard or something. And then it cuts back and like it's a full on like horrible raping of these two girls. And it just goes back and forth, and folk music starts playing for no reason, like during the horror sequences that should be more horrific. Like it makes for a really strange time.
Yeah, the tonal shifts are dizzying in this movie and constant.
And so crass. We have like them preparing for the Virgin's birthday party, of course, juxtaposed with the Virgin getting deflowered, in these horrible ways. It's just,
And, I think, like, I like a lot of George Romero's, like, early films that they have this weird, like, amateurish quality that feels purposeful in a way that is kind of dangerous. And I think this does have kind of a dangerous feel to the ineptitude, because it always feels like they're ready to just sail over, crossing these lines of taste and horrific things that you might suddenly see that the rest of the movie is not preparing you for. And that definitely is kind of unsettling, although it does feel a lot to me like, this is a guy who's still figuring out just how to make a movie. And a lot of that dissonance is inadvertent. But it definitely is a personality. And after this, I ended up watching the remake, which I don't remember if it was actually a Platinum Dunes remake or if it just seemed like one. I can't remember what year that it came out, and it's been a few months now since I watched it. But
and how was that?
You can see how unsurprisingly, like, it is miles better directed, acted, paced. It's tonally completely consistent. It's a very good looking movie. Who is the guy? Jesse from Breaking Bad. Aaron Paul is in it.
Okay.
And he's got a really great cast.
But they really, I don't know. Have you seen it, Keith?
I have. It's been a long time, and it's one of those, like so many horror remakes. It's just one of those things I know I've seen, but the actual content of it just kind of, floats through my brain. And I think it's weird. It's like something particular about this, these sort of strain of horror remakes we got in the aughts that they just seem like they epitomize like the we have this name, let's make a product around it, but there's nothing really to it at all.
Exactly. And it's just a great example of how something can be much better made, but it definitely does not have any personality to it. And it completely fumbles all the parts that should be provocative about this story. One of the big ones is that the daughter who gets killed in the original, you think gets killed in the remake, and she like emerges from the lake to return home to assist in revenge towards the end. And even worse, the parents are pretty much framed as killing the killers in self-defense, which erases the whole point of both of these movies.
The corrupting of the parents, yeah.
Exactly. So if I give this movie credit for anything, it's you are having this time capsule, lightning in a bottle kind of quality, where you are seeing the hippies in this Vietnam Manson family kind of influenced atmosphere, which again, I don't think the film on its face really handles that stuff in any kind of elegant way, but it is there. And I think the subtextual things, which sometimes creep maybe into being over textual in this, that's what makes this memorable.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think he's not concerned about being subtle at all, and it is. I mean, I think this is an interesting movie because, like, in content and in look, even it doesn't really, and certainly in acting quality, sometimes it's not that different from like the really kind of like grimy grindhouse stuff that was being made and played in really cheap theaters at the time. But I think the framework of the source material, and I think Craven this really helps set it apart. I think Craven wants to invest a lot of ideas in this. I think he realizes he's being big and over the top in terms of like making this downfall being someone going to a rock concert and smoking marijuana, or trying to get marijuana, the sin that this instantly, she's instantly punished for, to an order of magnitude for this one sin. It's like it's very much like, it's very much what a lot of kids were doing at the time. I think one way to see it is like really moralistic, but I think it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, I was trying to put it into words and I had some trouble really, because it does feel more so that he's depicting some kind of nightmare of what parents of the time like are imagining would happen. Like it's like a Scared Straight movie or something. Like, but to the extent of being, I don't know, like almost a John Waters movie too. Like I would be amazed if Wes Craven, who was not.
I would love to see the next version of this by Wes Anderson.
He's so cute. But I'd be amazed if there wasn't sort of some kind of influence there, because this does have that kind of like guerrilla quality. And like what you're saying, it feels like anything could happen. Like they might actually cross a line, or I might actually see something like that I shouldn't. But it's just like even the way they build the horrible crime family and everything, they're like super criminals. They're just so like, but still like they're trying to make them lovable too. Like everything has all these different layers to it. So it's like it's trying to please a hippie audience with some of that, a far out hip audience, and also like be this weird moralist tale. Again, the inconsistency is what's interesting about it. I feel like it's probably like dependent on the day. If you like ask the filmmaker like what's going on here, it's like, oh yeah, well we're not doing that anymore. That's not actually what's going on. Like I feel like it's like jumping around.
Yeah, I thought of Waters too. The criminal family could be neighbors to some of John Waters' characters, but I think Waters and Craven are kind of breathing some of the same air here, where you have the shadow of the Manson family kind of hanging over both
time.
This and Waters' early films as well. But just sort of this general sense that kids are being, whole generations being lost. Parents don't understand what's happening to their kids. The dangers are so much more pronounced than when they were growing up, whether that's true or not. I think certainly the feeling that's in the air. And I think the way it taps into all that is part of what makes it so powerful. And I think the graphic violence, I think people who went to see really like, Herschel Gordon Lewis and a bunch of other low budget grindhouse filmmakers might have been accustomed to it. But this, as you said, played a little wider than that. Like, I think this is harder stuff than even people that would go to a scary movie in 1972 were used to getting. You have to keep telling yourself it's only a movie. It's only a movie.
Right.
Right. Yeah. They're making the victim pee their pants. Like, it is like, it's not just stabbing or not even just sexual assault. It's like twisted kind of torture stuff going on in this.
And if you listen to the audio commentary, that was unsimulated urination going on. I mean, this is not a pleasant film to make. It seems like, I think, in terms of like seeing stuff that crosses the line, you're not actually seeing anyone actually getting hurt, but the discomfort is in some ways quite real.
No, I don't think they were comfortable. No.
Yeah. The stuff that happens in the woods, I think, is a big part of what pushes this movie over the edge as far as being disturbing. I mean, in the climax, when the parents are taking their revenge, we do start to get, silly stuff like the, fellatio turned disemboweling, or however you want to describe that. And,
the dad doing like a Home Alone thing with the house,
Yes, which Wes Craven loves to do. I keep seeing that in his movies. In The Hills Have Eyes, they booby trap all of the trailers
too.
Yep, the people under the stairs. Like, it's kind of like his trademark.
Huh. The auteur touch.
Yeah, but what happens in the woods is just so extended and sadistic and really hard to watch. And the whole time, he's constantly cutting back to the parents at home baking the cake, or I think the second half of this movie, like half of it feels like we spend it with these bumbling cops and their adventures on the chicken truck. And it's like, for how docu-realistic and guerrilla style this is, it's weird how much he keeps undermining that with this like jaunty honky-tonk score that comes in at all the like inappropriate places.
Yes.
And the folk songs, which I think David Hess actually sang, who plays.
Yeah, they're co-written by his friends, Craven's son Stephen Chapin, who is Harry Chapin's brother. You're reading up on this. Harry Chapin, the singer, was also an editor and basically taught Wes Craven how to edit films.
Oh wow! There's something I didn't know about the Cats in the Cradle guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and the Silver Spoon.
Yeah. So I can imagine that Craven himself, I mean, probably over the years too, watching it back and being parts of documentaries and DVD releases, is probably a lot of stuff that he wishes he might have done differently as far as that stuff goes. I don't know. I haven't heard him talk about it necessarily. But
yeah, I don't know. He was always, very professorial in his interviews. So I'm not sure, like, emotion and regret or something that he would always, necessarily express about his work. It's funny to think of, though, following a train of thought like that, in 1972, I'm not sure anyone would have predicted that Wes Craven and John Waters would both be working in mainstream filmmaking, right. Not that many years later.
Yeah, and I wonder, that's why, because I'm pretty sure I've seen all of Wes Craven's films. I went through like his whole filmography at one point, and he has a lot of interesting stuff going on in there. I mean, anybody who's listening, like, we keep throwing his name around, but obviously he went on to do the Nightmare on Elm Street films and Scream. And I still think that the first Scream might be like the movie I like the most that he was behind. And it's so opposite of this and a lot of his other films. It's like his most polished directorial work.
Yeah, he can really make a movie at that point. Yeah, he can really make a movie at that point.
So I wonder if maybe just his writing was definitely something that got a little better as time went on, but still was never that great. But he's a good ideas guy. Like, if you know the idea of this movie and of Nightmare on Elm Street and The Hills Have Eyes, they have these great hooks to them. It might be kind of surprising when you watch them and see, how they're executed all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this one in particular would be surprising with its reputation that it has, where people would pop it in today and see just how lo-fi,
zany it is,
and amateurish it is. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, it's zany, but it also is like, yeah, what is the idea of it? The idea does seem like, I don't know, one of the quintessential like blowbacks against the hippies. Like, such a way that like it's amazing how fast it happened. Yeah, like we were saying, like Bergman wasn't all that long ago. And as far as America is concerned, it does seem like we had like this little stint where we were like, we can show nudity, we can show the real stuff. We want to see the real stuff. And the real stuff very, very quickly became like, we're going to like see the ugly stuff, the ugliest stuff we can find, like uglier, uglier, uglier. Just because, yeah, and like you're almost like, I don't even know if there's like really a huge thesis behind that with with these guys. It's more just that prurient sort of impulse. Like it's very, very like punk rockers just wanting to make like the ugliest sound they can and the fastest drum beat they can, you know, for this song, just because they want to do that. Yeah, there's something, I don't know, refreshing about how like not deep some of it is, but at the same time, it's very unrefreshing because it is just so bleak and so like nihilistic. Just to like spend your time in this place.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the year after Straw Dogs, so like there is something again. It is definitely, the era has its trademarks, including some really graphic depictions of sexual assault and violence that we weren't getting a few years earlier. But I would say I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think part of why this movie works though is I'm not sure prurient is the right word, because I think the torture scenes in this are so unthrilling and so untitillating that it is it inspires repulsion more than sort of like titillation, I guess, in a way. It's just I think again that's part of why, you know, again, I hope never to watch this movie again. But I am fascinated by it, and I'm fascinated by why it works as well as it does. And I think the sort of its commitment to depicting violence as, you know, as you know, unblinkingly as it does is part of it. It's not a thrill. It's not there for the thrills.
I don't think it's designed. Yeah, I mean, I don't use that word necessarily. Yeah, like I don't see it as they're trying to get a rise out of the audience is going to get a thrill out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I just can't help but see that there's some sort of like almost juvenile. Again, not necessarily putting it down, because that is what kind of makes it interesting. Like a sort of juvenile button pushing going on. I guess that's all.
What can we get away with? Yeah.
Like I just don't think there's like a huge thesis behind them going forth and doing this stuff, right?
Well, and I think that we need to take into consideration the whole, you know, arc with the parents at the end, right? Like that is supposed to be the revenge part of the rape revenge film. Like that's the catharsis, and things do get a little more fun there in the sense that you are rooting for the parents, and it does take the wind out of it a little bit, you know, with the way that the main guy makes his son shoot himself. I mean, that's definitely a way to go. That's not just, you know, pure revenge. But then again, the guy who gets his, you know, dick presumably bitten off is kind of a, yeah, that'll show him,
right,
kind of moment.
Yeah, I think that stuff is tittillating. You know, it is supposed to be kind of be thrilled by watching it. But I think the torture and murder of the girls is not. It's such a weird movie. As you say, the tones are just, you know, you could just get the bends trying to keep up with the tones
and the humor even in the end is that. Like it's more, it's beyond just like the corruption of the innocent parents, you know, now they are monsters doing this. It feels like it's funny. Like it's funny that quintessential Ma and Pop, Ma's chewing somebody's dick off and Pop has a chainsaw chasing around these guys. Like it is also has this layer of just like cartoonish, grisly silliness.
It is very similar to Virgin Spring in the sense of like how like a switch is flipped and they are now like they go from, you know, everyday parents into killing machines.
They know exactly what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that really should be, I think, the crux of this movie. I mean, that's like the really interesting part of this. And I did think of Straw Dogs too, because that's kind of what I think their arc is, right? The middle class, we assume probably liberal, you know, suburban parents who are pushed to brutally defend their home and avenge their family. It doesn't have isn't, I don't think, given the same kind of weight that it is in something like Straw Dogs. And we do get a great, just when everything's over. It's just freeze frame and then to black and right back to that honky tonk score and clips from the earlier movie with credits showing.
Yeah, remember how fun this movie was?
Yeah.
But
like they might as well have bloopers.
Remember
like
that
outtakes.
Scene? It's so silly. Yeah, not to harp too much on the parents, but yeah, there is just such a, like, I don't know, just the fact that, I don't know. I lost my train of thought with that, but
I do think this deserves credit for, this came out 2 years before the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I do think is like the masterpiece version.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Right. Because when you're talking about the, Manson in the air and post hippies, from the 60s kind of going into uncharted territory and there being unspeakable horrors there waiting for them, that this had to have been an influence on that. And I was noting how much The Hills Have Eyes seems to draw on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and we were watching that. But seeing that its start here almost feels like they were really just like returning the favor in the end.
See, this seems closer to achieving that goal, even though I would never put it like anywhere close to the classic status that I like, just my sheer love of that movie. But yeah, they both feel like lightning in a bottle movies, for better or worse. Like unrepeatable, like borderline accidents in certain aspects of like how they came into being. Yeah, they like, but it is interesting to see like where one I would hold like in super high esteem, the other one I would still see just as, I don't know, just being an ugly but very interesting, like kind of skid mark, like Freudian ridiculous skid mark.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was Hooper's second feature, but it's almost like, like so many, it technically is so superior to this film in terms of like, and he's so much a much better filmmaker than Craven at this point, just on a technical stylistic level. And I don't think, I like a lot of Hooper's later films, but he would never be that good again. And whereas Craven just kind of like, picked up skills along the way. It's different arcs to those careers.
Yeah. So any final thoughts about this? I would like to know, Seth, if you would unwatch this, because I feel like that might be in the air, whereas Virgin Spring wasn't, I think, that controversial, between our opinions. I don't think a whole lot of this movie, except that the way that it does capture its era's anxieties in a purposeful and also in a not purposeful way is something that's always interesting about horror movies from this era, or any era really. But I think this just proves that the movie itself doesn't necessarily have to be that good for it to do all those things too. So that's interesting. But yeah, where do you land?
No, I actually don't unwatch it as much as I do think this is like super unpleasant, and I would like to not watch it again. It is fascinating, and for all the reasons we've said, which is like there's this Frankenstein monster slapped together kind of weirdness that like someone who actually knows what they're doing could never make something so interesting in a way, like if they tried. But yeah, I don't know. I don't hold it. I go back and forth because yes, like it quintessential ugly 70s thing for sure. Like the most just as ugly as you can get it. But part of me almost wishes they would have gone. I go back and forth because yeah, that would kind of ruin that status if it like kind of poured more John Waters into it. But I almost wish there was more. I almost went more over the top in like the zaniness or just like the cartoonishness or something. I think I might have, I don't know, it might have found a overarching aesthetic of something. I don't know. Yeah, if it could have been closer to a John Waters even than it was, I think I might actually really like this movie. Instead, it is just kind of gross and makes me run away.
So
But
Divine would have improved this for you.
Oh man, yeah.
Okay.
Divine improves.
And a giant lobster.
I still find Pink Flamingos more disgusting than this movie, but that's a conversation, I guess, for another episode.
And your therapist.
Yeah, thanks. But yeah, Keith, so any final thoughts? Are you going to put this back in tonight maybe to see if you missed any subtleties?
No, I have a lot of admiration for this film, and historically it's incredibly important. But I'm sure I won't avoid it the rest of my life just because I write about that type of film and that era for films. But I'd like to. I'd like to. I've seen it enough for one lifetime.
Let's hold each other accountable. Let's all
never watch this film again.
Remember, don't do it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Keith, thank you so much. This was great. It's always a blast to have you on.
Sure. And I'd like to come back again and not have to cancel a bunch of times before I'm on.
Sure. Yeah, we could talk about some movies that we actually just watched before the episode.
Yeah, or at least not do this one.
Mondo Kane, maybe? No, definitely not. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, for sure. And is there anything else you want to throw out there while anything exciting going on?
A lot of my writing is at The Reveal. It's thereveal.substack.com, where it's been my long time collaborator Scott Tobias and I, a newsletter we do together. We're working through our big ongoing project is we're working through all 100 Sight and Sound's top 100 films of all time and doing like discussions about those. We're about a quarter of the way through at this point, so still lots of great or allegedly great movies. One of our readers was complaining about how you guys are critical enough of these movies. It's like the thing is, like, when you have 100 movies that a consensus of film critics agree are pretty great, you're not going to get too many duds.
Yeah. Not all that controversial.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot. That sounds a lot more fun than what we're doing on this podcast.
Yeah, why do you guys do this for yourself?
Yeah, I don't know. We're gonna need to take a break soon.
It's for the Lord. We have to whip ourselves, and then we can do whatever we want.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti. Hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.